Good evening and welcome to a special edition of RFL. I'm Richard French. Tonight we investigate a disturbing and a deadly trend happening inside a county jail right here in our region. Now every year more than 11,000 people spend time behind bars in Nassau County's jail on Long Island. Some unable to make bond or bail, others awaiting trial or serving sentences for minor crimes. It's important to remember here that until people have their day in court, everyone in our system is innocent till proven guilty. So then you ask, how could a stay at a Nassau County jail turn into a death sentence? Well, for 5 inmates within a span of 2 years, that is exactly what happened. 5 inmates, all males, within 24 months, killed themselves by hanging. The State Commission of Correction, which oversees jails and county sheriff departments, published 4 reports on the suicidal hangings. Although heavily redacted, the report's findings tell a disturbing story of, quote, gross inadequate care and a lack of appropriate supervision. The commission even went so far to say that the deaths could have been prevented with adequate medical and mental health care. Now, the most recent death, 32-year-old Iraq War veteran Bart Ryan of East Meadow, Long Island. Marine Sergeant Ryan, he was an electrical engineer, highly decorated for his service and conduct during combat. At his funeral, family and friends questioned how an Iraq War veteran could survive a combat zone but die within 24 hours in a jail cell in his own hometown. Now, in this RFL Special Investigation, Suicide Behind Bars, we're going to be asking that question about all 5 suicides. We're also going to hear from correction officials inside the jail who say that it is not a safe place and that something must be done. For more, I want to bring in our reporter Kim Langle, who has led this investigation and has much more. Kim?
Yeah, that's right, Rich. And believe it or not, the issue of jail suicides is actually not unique to Nassau County. It's a problem everywhere and happens in every jail. The reason that Nassau County is under the microscope is because of the high number, 5 suicides in just 2 years. Critics say there's a pattern of failing to protect inmates at the jail, but this latest chapter is proving to be the most deadly.
Well, it really started a few years ago when we started getting contacted quite frequently by current inmates at the Nassau jail. And what we saw was that many of their complaints were similar, and those complaints were very poor medical and mental health care.
You were getting calls from current inmates?
Correct. Inmates were calling us from the facility.
Calling you from jail, saying, this is so bad here, you have to help us.
Right, exactly. Calling us, sending us letters. You know, I'll give you an example. There was one inmate who was in his 50s. And he was diagnosed with glaucoma, and he needed eye drops. There were prescribed eye drops that he needed several times a day, and you know, his eyes were in a lot of pain because of the glaucoma buildup, so the eye drops were to alleviate that. And he would go weeks without getting the proper eye drops that he needed. I talked to him the other day. He called to tell me that he's now blind because the care that he received in the jail was terrible, and because he wasn't receiving the medicine when he was supposed to.
At the time of our interview, Samantha Fredrickson was the director of the Nassau County chapter of the New York Civil Liberties Union. She says that the inmate suffering with glaucoma is just one example of the more than 200 complaints they've received from Nassau County Jail inmates over the last 24 months. Their complaints have centered around the following: failure to receive necessary medication, failure to have chronic and life-threatening conditions treated, mistreatment of people with disabilities, and a lack of mental health services at the jail. Advocates like Samantha say if medical and mental health complaints are left untreated, it could lead to more suicides behind bars. And the NYCLU is not the only group taking that position. Surprisingly, the Union for the Corrections Officers who guard the Nassau County Jail feel the same exact way.
The level of inmate health care inside that facility is worse now than it ever was before. And what we're trying to bring to light is that if the conditions do not change, these tragic incidents are going to continue to keep happening.
According to the Department of Justice, suicide is the single leading cause of death in local jails, accounting for more than 29% of all jail deaths. However, over the last decade, jail suicides nationwide have been declining. According to the Department of Justice, during any given year in the last decade, more than 80% of jails nationwide have had no deaths in their custody. But that's not the trend at the Nassau County Correctional Center, where 5 inmates in a span of 24 months have committed suicide.
What's really important to remember is that people who are in the county jail, many of them are innocent because they're there, have been picked up on charges and are awaiting trial and have never been convicted of anything. So this really could be your brother or your son or your sister or your mother who's in the jail. 11,000 people a year, 2,000 at a time that are held in the jail, who really are our neighbors, and yet they're living in the shadows, they're living in the dark, they don't have a voice. They're humans. They deserve to be treated with human dignity and with something as essential as, being able to see a doctor when you're sick, being able to get the proper mental health medicine. It's just horrid that the county and the jail are ignoring thousands and thousands of lives.
The State Commission of Correction, which oversees all jails in New York, says they've made substantial inroads in safeguarding mentally ill inmates. It says it's been able to sharply reduce suicide rates since the early 1980s. But staffing cuts and inadequate training, common complaints we've heard from correction officials, have turned out to be shortcomings that have taken a deadly toll. And as we go through this hour, you're going to see exactly who's pointing blame at who. Rich?
Well, Kim, we mentioned 5 deaths within 24 months. Help put a face for our viewers on these guys. Who were they?
Yeah, you're exactly right. There have been 5 deaths within 24 months, beginning with the first suicide of Amon McGinn on January 3rd, 2010.
McGinn reported his drug use history at booking, which included a habit of cocaine and heroin, commonly called speedballs. According to the state's investigation, McGinn was screened for suicide risk and scored high, although it was noted that the corrections officers used an outdated suicide screening form that does not feature all the required questions. The state deemed McGinn's suicide a preventable death. 31-year-old Gasparino Godino died from suicidal hanging October 5, 2010. During his suicide screening, he reported the recent loss of his grandmother and a history of drug use and depression, according to the state's investigation. Godino was supposed to be placed under constant supervision, but the assigned officer was unaware of his mental health and withdrawal from drugs. The state's investigation found him to be clearly at risk for suicide attempts throughout his incarceration. 29-year-old Hervé Jeannot died from suicidal hanging almost 20 days after Godino. Jeannot was found guilty of murder in the first degree 1 day before his suicide. After corrections officers found Jeannot hanging in his cell, they began CPR. According to the state's investigation, Jeannot was able to be ventilated sufficiently and was still warm to the touch. However, the medical unit responded to the emergency with no resuscitation equipment.
These were just 3 of the 5 suicides, and we're going to be looking at the first 2 and talking with their families later tonight and hearing about their anguish. Rich?
Yeah, some very painful stories from those families. Thank you very much, Kim.